Hey, Weld.com viewers. My name's Shea. I'm the owner and operator of Fusion Welding and Fabrication. And today I'm going to be your host on this video. It's going to be a great video for any of you guys out there trying to get started or just looking for some extra info. What we're going to be going over today is some different ways of cutting metal. So with that, let's get started. Alright guys, so we're going to be going over a couple of different tools here we have at our disposal for cutting metal. Tools I have in front of me are my 5-inch hand grinder, my chop saw, as well as my plasma cutter. Now these three tools are all relatively readily available. You can get them online or in stores, and they're also relatively user-friendly. So we're going to be going over each of them, how to operate them safely, pros and cons, and some of the ins and outs of each. Now, maybe some of you guys have noticed that I am currently in a cast right now. So I will not be operating any of these tools as I can't really do it safely. I'm going to have my friend Curtis over here operate these tools for me. That's actually going to be good because you guys will be able to see firsthand exactly how easy these tools are to use, and you'll also see what it looks like for a beginner using them. So the tool I have right here is my 5-inch hand grinder. I currently have it set up with a zip disc or a cutting wheel, and that's what we're going to use to cut our metal today. Now, this is probably the number one tool that any welder or metal fabricator is going to have in their arsenal next to the welder itself. These are great for cutting metal, removing metal, or any finishing work. Now, before we go ahead and use this, we do want to check a few things to make sure it's going to operate safely. We're going to look at the guard, make sure it's on securely and safely. And the biggest thing is I want to take a look at my disc. Okay, these things do tend to break when dropped or flexed. I want to make sure that it's in good condition, there's no pieces missing or any frays. What happens if these are damaged when you start cutting, they can blow up and send shards. If you ever notice a damaged disc, it's best to get rid of it and replace it immediately. Now we're going to go over my friend Curtis quickly, dress him up with all his safety gear, and show you guys how to operate this thing. Alright, so before we get started operating any of these tools, it's important to go over our safety gear. How with the safety glasses, a fire retardant shirt. Of course, you're going to need a pair of gloves. And for the grinder, as well as the plasma cutter, we're going to be using my welding helmet. Now, with the grinder, it's especially important. You're either going to want a welding helmet that doubles as a face shield or an actual face shield itself. Like I said before, if these discs do ever become damaged, they can blow up and send shards. And for that reason, it's important. We want to protect our face as much as possible from any of those shards hitting us. All right, guys, so after a quick lesson and demonstration, Curtis here is already cutting like a pro. Now, the two things we want to remember when using a zip disc on a hand grinder is to try and keep that disc as straight as possible and to not bear down too hard on it. When doing either of these, we run the risk of that disc binding or starting to deteriorate, and this in turn can send shrapnel towards us and make a dangerous situation. Now, while we're cutting, there are two ways that we can cut. We can either do a side-to-side method or the plunge method. When doing the side-to-side, we're going to start by scoring our cut line. This is going to give us a visual representation of where we want to cut. Then we're going to run the grinder side-to-side, slowly removing material until the cut is complete. The other way we can cut, again, is by scoring our cut line to give ourselves that visual representation again. And then we're going to plunge the grinder directly down to the metal until it cuts away. Now, I usually tell people to use the side-to-side whenever possible. This does make your disc last a little longer, and it also is a little safer. That being said, sometimes we have no choice but to plunge, especially if we're cutting within a part and don't want to cut all the way through. But try and stick to the side-to-side whenever possible. Now, of course, a grinder is a great tool, and we all have one if we're in the welding or fabrication industry, but there are a few drawbacks to it. Of course, this is a manual way of cutting, so the quality of the cut is completely dependent on you and your skill level and the amount of practice you have with it. It's also quite dirty, as you can see. It sends a lot of sparks and dust everywhere. And when cutting through thicker material, it can take a little longer and it is a little harder on the body. Alright, so maybe you've been working a little while now and you've decided that you want to do a bit of an upgrade, maybe get your first saw, and this is probably the first thing you're going to look at. This is just an abrasive chop saw. You pick these up at any hardware store. They're not overly expensive. I think I picked this one up for around $300 when I bought it. And it's a great first saw to use. Now, before we use it, just like the grinder, I want to do a quick inspection and make sure everything's looking good. I'll check the power cord, make sure it's not frayed. Look at my guards, make sure they're on securely and not damaged. And just like the grinder, I want to take a look at the blade as well. Okay, it's a very similar blade to what we use on a hand grinder. It is an abrasive disc, just like a cutting wheel or a zip disc. And we want to do the same check and make sure that it's not damaged. Okay, if this does have any cracks, missing pieces, or frays, just like the grinder, it can send trap metal. And you want to make sure that it's in good condition before cutting. So just like the hand grinder, after a quick lesson, Kerr's able to use this with ease. Now it is important that we don't bear down on the blade. This will cause it to bind and can send shrapnel metal towards us. It only requires light pressure, and the saw blade is going to do the rest of the work for us. Now with this saw, we can cut through steel as well as stainless. We can do different shapes of material and thicknesses. And as long as we can clamp it in the vise, it should be able to cut through it. It's also relatively lightweight. The cost is not very high. It can be used with a regular 120 volt plug. And that's what I like to use on site when doing multiple cuts that I would rather not do with a hand grinder. Of course, there are a few downsides to this. The most obvious being it is very loud and messy. It sends a lot of dust and sparks everywhere. And it also doesn't always leave the most accurate cut. What can happen when cutting through larger pieces of material is the blade does tend to wander to one side or the other, giving you a cut that is not perfectly 90. And it also leaves a pretty big burr. Because of this, most of your cuts will require some cleanup before we can use it in our fabrication. That being said, it's still a great saw, and anyone looking to purchase their first saw, this would be a great option. So next up, we've got probably one of my favorite tools in my shop that I use for cutting metal, and that is going to be my plasma cutter right here. Now again, this is a great tool for anyone to have. It's super quick, makes a really nice cut, and it's relatively user-friendly to use. Now there is one drawback to this. You do need an air compressor, so whenever you're thinking about getting a plasma cutter, make sure to factor that into your budget if you don't already own one. Now this is more of an industrial or commercial plasma cutter. I paid about $2,000 for this one at use price. That being said, you can get a much cheaper one online or at some of your big box stores. And for hobbyist use, they're not too bad. So I'm just going to go over quickly how to set this machine up. So I do have it plugged in right now to my 230 volt plug. Next, I'm going to go ahead and plug my air into the back. Now, notice on the back side here, I do have a filter and water separator. This is very important, and I highly recommend to get one if you do want a plasma cutter. You want to try to avoid any water or moisture going through this. What that's going to do is it's going to ruin your contact tips and your electrodes. You'll notice very quickly those are quite expensive and they add up very quick. Next step I'm going to do is turn it on and then set my air pressure. Now you'll notice I have 3 spots on this that I can switch between. My first one is for cutting things like bar grading. What it's going to do is the pilot is always going to stay lit even if it's not in contact with the metal. My next setting right in the middle is just my cut or piercing setting. And then my last setting down here is for gouging. So if you're just going to be cutting a piece of plate, I'm going to set it to the middle for my cut setting. And then I want to come up here and set my air pressure. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab my torch and pull the trigger quick, initiating the pilot light. And I can notice that it's still orange down here, and it means my pressure is too low. Now there's a dial on top of this I can use to set my pressure. So I'm going to turn it until the green comes into the middle like that. And I'm going to go ahead and pull my trigger again. I noticed that it didn't move at all. It's still green in the middle, and that's how I know my pressure's set. Now that, we're all set and ready to start cutting. So after a little bit of practice, this tool here is about as easy as point and shoot. The way to use it is we'll be starting it off our material, pulling the trigger, and initiating our pilot light. We'll then be coming over top of the material, which will start the cut. We'll then slowly drag it across whichever material we're trying to cut. Now the way the plasma is achieved is when pulling the trigger, it will force an electrical arc through a gas. In this case, our gas is just air coming directly out of my air compressor. This creates the plasma, which is able to vaporize the material we're trying to cut. Because of this, we're able to cut through various types of material, including steel, stainless, and aluminum. Cut through different thicknesses, depending on the output of our machine, and it can cut through pretty much any shape of material you can think of. Now, the quality of the cut is really going to come down to the operator. This is a manual cutting process, but with a bit of practice, you can achieve nice cuts with very little cleanup. Good way to get a more accurate straight cut too is by using something called a straight edge. What this is we'll be clamping down a piece of straight material to whatever we're trying to cut, and we'll be using it as a guide. This will allow us to achieve a very accurate and clean cut, and it's a great way to cut when trying to get something cut straight. Now, there are a few drawbacks. Of course, this can be a little more expensive, although there are cheaper options out there. It does require a form of gas, whether it be an air compressor or other gases. And because of the fact that we need that gas, this tool is not overly portable. That being said, I absolutely love having a plasma cutter, and this is not a tool you'll regret getting. Hey guys, just want to stop for a minute and give a big shout out to Como Welding Caps here. Of course, being welders, we have the biggest brains in the metalworking industry. And with those big brains comes big heads. This is the first welding cap I've ever had that actually fits my head, and I absolutely love it. Super comfortable, high quality, and I don't think I'll ever go back to another brand. Yeah, guys, I'd like to introduce you to the other side of my shop here. This is where I keep most of my metal, some of my tools, as well as my horizontal bandsaw. Now, this is my number one tool I have in my shop for cutting metal, and it's a tool I use every day. Now, the reason I love this is it can cut various materials, various sizes, and it does it very accurately and efficiently. This saw can actually cut all the way up to a 45-degree angle, and you'll notice when it does do the cuts, they come out very accurate, and they don't require very much cleanup. The other thing I love about this saw is that I can actually cut bundles and multiple pieces of material at once. It's great for production jobs or jobs where I need to cut multiple pieces at once, saving me a lot of time. And my absolute favorite thing about this saw is that it is fully pneumatic. And what that means is that I can control the saw completely from the buttons right behind me. I don't need to actually lift the head, do the clamp, or anything like that. Everything is with the click of a button. The only thing I actually have to do myself is feed the material and measure it. The saw will take care of the rest. Yeah, this really takes off a lot of strain from my body, and it just makes it a lot easier on me. Obviously, looking at this isn't going to be your number one hobbyist tool because of the price as well as the size of it. But you can get smaller saws like this, and they are a great addition for anyone working in their garage or just trying to take on some extra work. Guys, and the last tool we're going to be showing you today is the one I have right behind me and the newest addition to my shop. It's my 55-ton iron worker. Now, this tool, unfortunately, will only cut plate or angle iron, but it does so very quickly, and it can actually cut very thick material. This model right here will cut up to a piece of 3/4 inch by 4 inch flat bar, or a piece of 3/8 by 3 inch angle iron. The other thing this tool does that's very helpful is it has a punching station over here. This will punch up to a 1 1/16 hole through a piece of 5/8 plate. Now, on the other side is my open side, and it's where I can put multiple attachments. Then these attachments include benders, copers, notchers, and other metal fabricating tools that I can order specifically for this machine. Now, I absolutely love having this. It's been a great addition to the shop. This is not going to be one of your hobbyist tools, as it does have a pretty big price point. It's also very heavy, coming in at about 2,500 pounds, and it also takes up a pretty big footprint. So not something you're going to see in your everyday hobbyist garage, but something that most welding shops are going to have. It's a great addition. Alright guys, that's going to be it for today. I hope you guys learned something, or maybe I got you interested in trying out some of these tools. I do want to be clear that this is by no means all the tools we have in the industry. Things like vertical bandsaws, laser tables, shears, torches, the list goes on, and we can never fit them all into one video. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Until next time, my name's Shea, and happy welding.